Good morning. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. It's a kind of a cool, rainy morning, but there's a lot of warmth in here and a lot of energy in here, and it's great to be together as the Watershed. What a wonderful congregation this is. My name is Michael Strange. I'm the pastor of adult discipleship here. Pastor Lance is away today, and he asked me to, to speak today, and I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah, I'm sure." So anyway, he and his family, it's good that he and his family can get away for a few days. They haven't been able to do that for quite a while. Welcome. Like I said, I'm the pastor of adult discipleship, and in the coming months, I hope to be sharing some of my thoughts and ideas about how we can grow in our faith and how we grow as disciples of Jesus Christ. And I'm looking forward to that. I've met a lot of you. I see some very familiar faces out there, and warm and friendly faces. And this is a warm and friendly congregation. And my wife Shirley and I have been so blessed as we have begun to get to know you and to meet you. And we're looking forward to that continuing in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much. Last Sunday, Pastor Lance began a new series for the Lenten season, which is entitled Beyond Sacrifice. It's up there on the screen. And I think the idea here is we all know what sacrifice is, and we all know about this journey that leads to the cross and then to the resurrection and Easter. Is about the ultimate sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. But we have these weeks that lie before us where we have an opportunity to really think about this and let it sink in and see how it applies to each and every one of us. And so I hope that's going to be a part of all that we do in the coming weeks. The season of Lent I didn't grow up in a tradition that even celebrated Lent most of the time. So I was probably in my 20s before I knew what it was really all about. And I thought, it sounds kind of a strange name, Lent, and really means lengthen. The days are lengthening, and it's about spring, and the days getting longer. That's really what it goes back to. But I'll tell you a story. We had in one of the congregations we served. We had a very dear lady who decided that her way to celebrate Lent for our congregation at that time was to gather all of her Lent from her dryer. I'm not kidding. And so weeks and months before she began to before the Lenten season arrived, she began to gather her Lent, and she had a lot of it. And she brought it up to the church, and there was a large wooden cross that hung over this area right here. And so she put all this Lent over the cross. And everybody said, that's interesting. And so it was there, and during the Lenten season, during these weeks, it would parts of it would fall down onto the piano and the musicians, and they would frown about it, but believe it or not. And then it was all gone for Easter Sunday, and she was trying to make a point. But, we all thought that was different. So, if I were to ask you to select a symbol that best represents the dominant values of our age, what do you think it might be? Think of some symbols. Maybe, what about the golden arches of McDonald's? Or what about a Coca-Cola can, maybe? What about that little piece of fruit that has a bite taken out of it? Yeah. Everybody knows what that is, the Apple Mac. And in the last 10 or 15 years, this symbol has proliferated so much, and all around the world, of course. But let me suggest another one to you. That's on your shorts and your running shoes. It's on Tiger Woods' hat. And it's on athletic players, the swoosh. When I say the swoosh, we know what that is, the Nike logo. Did you know that several years ago, there was a young lady, a young art student, who was paid the grand sum of $35 to come up with a symbol for Nike? $35. And this is what she came up with. And it's grown, it's proliferated. Everybody, when you say the swoosh, everybody knows what that is. It's on my running shoes. It's on a lot of places. And let me suggest this one. for the dominant values of our culture because it represents speed, and it represents victory and winning and all of that. And actually comes from, in Greek mythology, Nike was the goddess of victory, and she would sort of hover over contestants and athletic contestants and bestow prizes on them as she saw fit. That's where it all sort of originated from. But winning and victory are something that are values that are important in our culture. I mean, really. Now, if I were to say, what is the symbol of the Christian faith? What is the symbol that best represents the symbol of the Christian faith? Would it be a baptismal font or a manger or a communion cup? What would it be? Of course, it would be the cross. Yeah. Because the cross represents the dominant values of the Christian faith. It's a symbol that represents service and sacrifice, and the profound mystery that one gains one's life by losing it, and the biblical promise that real life and real victory come through the cross. And so in this season of Lent, we're really making a journey toward the cross. And some of us would like to kind of, there are some people who have problems with the cross. I mean, let's face it. And so in some circles, we kind of skip over the season of Lent, we skip over the cross, we go right to Easter and the celebration of the resurrection. That's great, that's joyful, but I think it's important for us to make this journey with Jesus, who the Bible says, set his face to go to Jerusalem and to face what he knew was coming. And in a way, we can make that journey with him and really have the time, the days, and the weeks to think about this and what it means for each of us. Well, as I said, Pastor Lance last week began a new sermon series called Beyond Sacrifice. And the idea is, what is behind this idea of sacrifice? What is beyond the idea of sacrifice? Beyond just the physical act of making sacrifices that we read about in the Bible. What does God want us to understand about how this applies to our lives? And there are lots of places in the Bible that talk about this. One of them is the 51st Psalm. Psalm 51, beginning verse 16 and going through verse 19. Here's what the psalmist says. It says, "You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, and a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. May it please you to prosper Zion, to build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in sacrifices of the righteous, and burnt offerings offered whole. Then bulls will be offered on your altar." Think about it. What is the psalmist saying here? He seems to me to be saying that God is more interested in what happens on the inside of us. And if we're not in the right spirit, if we're not in the right place in our heart, if we're not in the right place with our relationship with God, when sacrifices are made, then we're missing the whole point. And so I think this is an important message for us to think about. Last week, Pastor Lance talked about Saul and Samuel and their encounter, and about how Saul was talking about sacrifices, and Samuel says, to obey is better than sacrifice. And Saul had not obeyed. He had kind of messed up and missed the point. And Saul says, to obey is better than sacrifice. Yeah. Obedience is hard for us. I mean, even our Lord struggled with this as he's going to the cross. Remember when he was in the garden and he asked his friends to come there and be with him to support him in his hour of need, and he's struggling, and he's sweating drops of blood and already suffering, thinking about this and saying, Father, do I really need to go through with this? And then he finally says what? In obedience says, and yet not my will, but your will be done. And he, of course, does go through with it. And so I think it's really important for us to think about the intent behind the sacrifice and What happens in the heart is so important. But what about the New Testament? There's a wonderful passage in Mark 12, beginning at verse 28 going through verse 34, where Jesus is having an encounter with one of the teachers of the law, as he did many different times. And here's one of those, which actually, in Mark's version, he gives us a little insight, and he brings out the idea of sacrifice. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied, you are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, and with all your understanding, with all your strength, to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Yeah, they kind of walked away and said, okay, yeah, you're so this is an amazing passage because notice the teacher of the law said, which one is the most important? But Jesus gives two, sort of, but he sort of combines them together, doesn't he? And these are from totally different places in the Torah. One is from the first commandment is from the book of Deuteronomy. The second one is from the book of Leviticus. And Jesus combines them together as if to say to us, this is really one. We ought to think about these two as one thing because they go together. Because if you love God, you're going to naturally want to reach out and love your neighbor. If you don't love God, you're probably not going to be that concerned about your neighbors or those around you. You're going to be more concerned about yourself, how things are going for you. But if you really love God, if you really have a right relationship with God, then you're going to be thinking about those around you, your family, your friends, your coworkers, children, youth, people you know. And so it's amazing to me that Jesus, and he certainly had the authority to do this, he sort of combines them together for all time so that whenever we think about them, we can think of them together as a whole. So in a way, Jesus said, yes, this is the greatest commandment. Maybe it has two parts, but they go together. And so sacrifice, the first part, the Shema, is the love the Lord your God with your whole being, everything you are, your heart, mind, soul, strength, everything, which is recited in every Jewish worship service. This is it. And then love your neighbor as yourself, which goes right along with it. But then it's so interesting that this teacher of the law adds in the idea that here makes the comment that, yeah, that really is more important than sacrifice. Your relationship with God and your relationship with other people is more important than this other stuff. If that's not right, the sacrifices don't really mean that much. And so, in 2018, here at the Watershed, we've talked about how we want to think about this. We want to emphasize growing as disciples. We want to emphasize our relationships with others. So, and that's really what that's about, isn't it? Growing in our relationship with God as a follower of Jesus Christ. What that means, how I grow more into the person He created me to be, and then how that affects my relationships with others. Why is this so important? It's so important because this is how God created us. We are hardwired. I like that expression. We're hardwired for relationship, spiritually, with God and with others. And if that's not a part of our life, then something is missing, and something seems not quite right, maybe. And I've met a lot of people across the years who were sort of, they said, something's not quite right in my life. And they may not have said that directly, but in talking with them, you sense that. And because they got things done, I mean, they took the kids to school. They went to work every day. They made a living. They went to the grocery store and put food on the table. They did all this stuff, and yet something in their life was missing and just a little bit askew and not quite the way things needed to be. And they would often say, I just can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm kind of down. And sometimes it manifested as depression. Sometimes it manifested as anxiety. But something that just wasn't quite there. And I felt this way. I can remember a time in my 20s, I guess, when I was going through a rough time and things weren't going right in my life. And I was down and I just was not in a good place. And I shared this with a friend. And my friend said, well, you just need to get right with God. And at first I kind of wanted to hit him. I mean, but as time went by, I realized, yeah, that's true. That's right. You're right. There's a lot of truth in that. I mean, he may not have gone about it in the best way or been very tactful about it. But ultimately, that is an ultimate truth, is it not? When we grow as disciples, when we begin to get things right with God, that's really about transformation, isn't it? It's about being changed and growing and being transformed. Paul uses that word. He says, don't be conformed to the world's values, but be transformed to God's values. So this is about transformation. We long for transformation. And that manifests in a lot of different ways. I mean, it manifests in New Year's resolutions. And when we think about, a lot of people think about those things we want to let go of. Okay, I'm going to let go of these things in my life. I'm going to add these. I want to do these things, and because I want to be a better person in 2018, and this lasts for a few weeks or a few months. But it's all about this desire in all of us, I think, to want to be a better person, and to think about what that means. And we want to be, we want to have a closer walk with God. We want to be a better husband, a better wife, a better parent. We want to be more efficient in our work. We want to be more financially secure. We want to have peace instead of anxiety and worry and on and on. We want all of these things. We want to be transformed and have these things the way we'd like for our life to be. And ultimately, we long for, a lot of people, for some kind of a pill or a potion or a formula that will make everything all right. And Paul says it took a Roman cross to accomplish that. Isn't that amazing? It took a Roman cross to accomplish that. Because there's power in the cross. Not eloquence, not worldly wisdom, but the power and the wisdom of God. And that's the heart of the gospel. That's the heart of the gospel. Whenever Paul talks about theology, most often he talks about the cross and the sign of the cross. And in this passage we're going to look at, he talks about how the cross to the Jews is a stumbling block and the cross to the Gentiles is foolishness. But to those of us who are called, to those of us who are on the journey to being saved, it is the power of God unto salvation. And so here's a difficult thing. In a lot of circles, there's a tendency to avoid the cross and, as I said, just jump over it and get to Easter. And the Jews were offended by the cross. The Gentiles were offended by the cross. And are there people today who are offended by the cross? Sure. Yeah, I've met a lot of them. Why? Well, because what happened to the cross is gut-wrenching. It's gruesome, and it makes us a little uncomfortable, doesn't it, sometimes? But Paul addresses this head on in this passage. Here's what he says. He says, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs. Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. A stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. And so, very eloquently, Paul says, yeah, think about this. He says the Jews seek signs. And it, he knew. I mean, he says it. He says, I'm a Jew of Jews. Believe me, I know about Jews. And the Jews look for signs. When John the Baptist was imprisoned in Jerusalem, and he sent word by his disciples that go to Jesus and ask him, are you the one? Are you the one we should look for? Or should we look for another? Are you really the one? It seems strange John would ask this after what he baptized Jesus and everything. And you remember what Jesus said? He didn't say, go tell him I'm the one. He said, go tell John the signs you have seen. The deaf hear, the lame walk, the blind are made to see. Go tell John the signs you have seen. That will be his answer. When the Hebrew people, the children of Israel, were been led out of Egypt, Moses led them out of Egypt. They're in the desert. They're wandering in the desert, and they began to grumble. They began to say, well, we're hungry. We don't have enough to eat out here. We're thirsty. There's not enough water. We had all these things back in Egypt. We had enough water, enough to eat then. And where's this God who has led us out to the wilderness? Why doesn't he give us a sign that he's still with us? And they kind of got in trouble for that. Because throughout the rest of the Bible, it looks back to that time and says, that wasn't what that was a problem. Because they should have just trusted God and waited patiently for God to act in his good time. But yeah, the Jews looked for signs. What about in Jesus' day? Were the Jews still looking for signs in Jesus' day? You bet they were. The Gospel of Matthew, Matthew quotes Zechariah and says, tell the daughter of Jerusalem, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey. In a few weeks, we'll gather and we'll have palm branches and we'll celebrate Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry of Jesus on a donkey into Jerusalem, where the people laid their garments on before him and waved palm branches and shouted, Hosanna, blessed is this one who comes in the name of the Lord. And those were all signs for the Jewish people of that this one coming today is the Messiah. But as the week progressed, and as the shadow of the cross began to grow larger and darker, the people began to shrink away. And to say, wait a minute, this is not a sign that we can accept. Our king is no good to us if he goes and gets himself killed. And that's why Paul says the cross was a stumbling block to the Jews. Paul says the sign you're going to get is a dead carpenter from Nazareth hanging on the cross. Paul says that they also sought wisdom. The Greeks sought wisdom. The Greeks means the Gentiles. That's us. Talks about the Jews, and he talks about the Gentiles. He says, yeah, the Gentiles seek wisdom. What does he mean by that? Well, think about the great Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and a great search for wisdom. They talked about God or the Creator. They said, yeah, the Creator is the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover. There was another word they had for God, apotheia. Apotheia, from which we get our word apathy, apathetic. no particular feeling, not really caring. This is how they thought about God. In other words, this Creator, this God, whoever and wherever it is so big and so powerful. If it created everything, there's no way that it could be concerned with my life or your life. Apotheia, there's no way that he could really care about what I'm struggling with. And yet here is one who wept beside a grave. Here is one who stood looking over the city of Jerusalem and said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you like a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings to love them and protect them and to keep them safe." Here's one who went into the temple one day and took a lash and drove out the money changers and said, "You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves, and it's supposed to be a house of prayer for all people." A lot of feeling there. Here is one who finally, on that dark Friday, would cry out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken even me?" And the Greeks said, "That's God? You got to be kidding. That's foolishness. That's ridiculous. That's laughable." The Greeks had another word, sophist. Sophist, which had to do with silver-tongued orators, people who would come and stand at the Acropolis in Athens, and they would talk at great length using big 4- and 5-syllable words and impress everybody with their eloquence. This carpenter from Nazareth spoke in words that little children could understand. This carpenter from Nazareth went to the Sea of Galilee and walked up to old rough-handed fishermen and said, "Hey, this is what I'm about. Would you follow me? Would you come with me?" And they listened and they believed him and they followed him. No big 5-syllable words required there. This Jesus is one who felt deeply and loved deeply and reached out to people and wanted to be with people and talked to them and communicated to them through marvelous stories that teach us so much. Paul says Christ crucified is a stumbling block to the Jews, foolishness to the Gentiles, but to those who are being called, it is the power of God unto salvation. Does that mean that some are called and some are not called? I don't think that's what it means. We don't really see that in Jesus. What we see is God through Jesus reaching out to everyone, extending invitation to everybody to come. The question ultimately becomes, are we listening? Remember what Jesus said? He said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock of the heart of every individual." And so, are we hearing and are we listening? It doesn't come knocking down the door. Sometimes it may just be a whisper. But Jesus reaches out to every individual. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was once asked, how in the face of so much suffering, how do you expect to make a difference? She said, one person at a time. That was her response. One person at a time. In relationships with him, with her, with this little one, with this one who is hurting, with this who is lost and confused. One person at a time through relationships. You see, the life that's offered in the cross is offered to all, but receiving it is done one person at a time. Jesus stands and knocks at the door of every heart, of every individual. So I would encourage you in these weeks that lie before us to think about what happens in the heart. And as we think about continue, as Pastor Lance leads us in the weeks to come, as we think beyond sacrifice and what's beyond that and behind it. What's the real intent of it? To look into the heart, into your heart, and listen for that knock, that nudge that God is wanting to say something to you. Say, here's a way that you can draw closer to me in these coming weeks as you think about Easter and celebrating the resurrection. Here's what you can do. Here's what I'm leading you, calling you to do. To become closer to me, to grow in your understanding of who I am, of who you are, and who I've created you to be. Listen for the knock and for the offer to make things right in your life. The cross has the power to make things right in your life.